The unexpected visitor. It was a quiet day aboard the flagship of the Galactic Coalition, a massive space station that orbited one of the oldest planets in the galaxy. The crew, mostly alien species, was going about their duties. They had seen it all: dozens of new planets, countless species, and endless mysteries. But today, something unusual was about to happen. A mysterious signal had been received. No one knew where it came from or what it meant. The signal was brief but powerful. It was a pattern, a rhythm, a message that seemed oddly familiar. It caught the attention of the highest-ranking officers aboard the flagship. The Galactic Coalition had dealt with many mysterious signals before, but this one felt different. They could not ignore it. The captain, a tall, silver-skinned being with sharp features, stood before a holographic screen. He was reviewing the data from the signal, his brow furrowed in concentration. The crew around him, a mix of species from across the galaxy, murmured among themselves. They were uneasy. The captain's silence only added to their growing sense of uncertainty. "Have we identified the source yet?" the captain asked, his voice cold but calm. "No, Captain," replied a young officer, her tentacles trembling slightly. "The signal's origin is unknown. It's as though it was purposely hidden. No traces, no patterns we can track." The captain was not surprised. Signals like this didn't just appear without reason. They were often part of a bigger plan, a hidden message or a test. But from whom? And why now? Just as the captain was about to order a deeper investigation, the doors to the command room slid open with a soft hiss. All eyes turned to the entrance. A figure stepped in, causing a ripple of tension through the room. He was not an officer, not an alien commander, or even an ambassador from a far-off star system. No, this was something completely different. The being who entered was human. The crew froze. Humans were rare in the galaxy. Few were seen outside Earth, and even fewer traveled beyond their planet. But this human was not just any human. He was a child. The child, no older than 10, walked confidently into the room. She wore a simple outfit, nothing fancy, just a small jacket and pants that were far too big for her small frame. Her eyes, a striking shade of green, glowed with curiosity and intelligence. She didn't seem out of place at all, even though she was the youngest and most unusual person in the room. The Admiral, a large and imposing creature from the distant Vega system, stood up from his chair. His many eyes blinked in surprise. "What is this?" he asked in a deep, rumbling voice. "She's the one," the captain replied, motioning to the child. The signal came from her. The Admiral's confusion only deepened. "Her," he repeated, staring at the small human. How could this child send such a signal? And why? The captain looked at the Admiral with a serious expression. "I don't know. But she's the one who can explain everything. She's the key to understanding what's really going on." The child stepped forward. She looked up at the Admiral with a calm but confident gaze. There was no fear in her eyes. She wasn't nervous at all. In fact, she looked like she belonged there. "Is everyone afraid of me?" she asked quietly, her voice surprisingly strong for someone so young. The Admiral, still trying to process the situation, shook his head. "No, we're not afraid. But we're confused. How are you here? Why are you here?" The child smiled slightly. "I'm here to show you something. Something that could change everything for your coalition." The room fell silent. The crew exchanged puzzled glances. How could a human child have such knowledge? And what was she talking about? The captain motioned for the child to continue. "What do you mean by that?" The child looked up at the Admiral again, her expression serious. "I can't explain everything right now, but I can show you. Follow me." The Admiral, despite his reservations, found himself nodding. The child seemed confident in her actions, and there was something about her presence that suggested she knew more than anyone else in the room. Something about the way she carried herself, like a force beyond her years. Without another word, the child turned and walked toward the back of the room, where a strange console sat. It was a piece of ancient technology, something the Galactic Coalition had discovered many cycles ago, but never truly understood. The child approached it as though it were a part of her world. "Stand back," she instructed. The crew hesitated for a moment before stepping aside. The Admiral watched in silence as the child placed her hands on the console, her fingers dancing over the surface. The console hummed to life, and a holographic display flickered on. "What is this?" the Admiral asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The child smiled again. "This is a Starship simulator," she said, "and it's not just a game." The Admiral's eyes widened in disbelief. Could this child truly understand the complexity of the galaxy's most advanced technologies? Was she some kind of prodigy, or was there more to her than met the eye? And then, before the Admiral could ask another question, the simulation began. The room was filled with a strange hum as the holographic display flickered to life. The child's fingers hovered over the console, her eyes focused and determined. The alien crew, including the Admiral, watched in silence, each of them trying to make sense of the situation. The hologram expanded in front of them, revealing a complex Starship simulator. It was a large-scale model, showing a massive spaceship that seemed to be designed for long, deep space travel. The ship was armed, sleek, and powerful. It was unlike anything the Galactic Coalition had ever seen. The child's small hands moved quickly over the controls, adjusting the ship's course, activating various systems, and even initiating tactical maneuvers. To the crew, it looked like the child was effortlessly commanding a starship, something that took years of training and experience. "This is impossible," muttered the Admiral, his many eyes fixed on the display. "How does she know how to use this?" The captain stood beside him, equally stunned. "I don't know, but she's doing it. She's controlling the simulator as if it's second nature to her." The child didn't seem to notice their astonishment. She was too focused on the ship's systems, adjusting them with precision and ease. Her actions were deliberate, and each move she made seemed to be part of a larger, unspoken plan. As the simulation continued, the starship on the screen began to move. It sped through space, dodging asteroids, weaving through debris fields, and engaging in dogfights with other ships. The maneuvers were fast and deadly. The child didn't hesitate. She didn't miss a single move. Each action was calculated, as if she had been trained to command a warship her entire life. The Admiral leaned in closer to the console, unable to tear his gaze away. "How is this possible? She's just a child. She's playing a game. This isn't real." But even as he said the words, something about the simulation didn't feel right. The movements of the starship were too smooth, too precise. The child wasn't playing. It felt like she was training for something much bigger. The captain watched the display closely, his mind racing. "Wait a minute. This isn't just a game. It's more than that." "What do you mean?" asked the Admiral, still fixated on the screen. "This simulation," the captain continued, his voice low, "it's too advanced. The level of detail, the accuracy of the combat strategies. It's like she's controlling a real ship. But she's just a child. She couldn't have learned this on her own." The Admiral's confusion deepened. "Then how is she doing it?" The child glanced up at them for the first time, as if sensing their thoughts. Her expression was calm, almost serene. "It's not a game," she said softly. "This is a simulation, yes, but it's also a test for all of you." The crew exchanged confused glances. A test? What was she talking about? The child continued without waiting for their questions. "I've already passed the test. Now, it's your turn." Before anyone could respond, the child made a final adjustment to the simulator, and the starship on the screen went into a steep dive, heading directly toward a massive enemy ship. The simulation showed the starship closing in at an incredible speed, ready to engage in a direct assault. The Admiral's eyes widened in disbelief. "What are you doing? You're going to crash." But the child didn't respond. She was too focused on the ship's movements. Just as the enemy ship appeared to be within striking distance, the child expertly executed a series of evasive maneuvers. The starship spun around, narrowly avoiding collision, and then positioned itself for an attack from a completely unexpected angle. The crew gasped. The simulation had just changed dramatically. It was no longer just a test. It was a battle. A real fight. The child's confidence was unwavering. She quickly launched a series of precision strikes at the enemy ship, targeting weak points with incredible accuracy. The holographic enemy ship shook under the force of the child's attack, and its shields began to flicker and fail. The Admiral, who had been watching in stunned silence, now found himself leaning forward, caught up in the unfolding scene. This isn't just a game anymore. She's fighting like a seasoned captain. The captain's face was pale. It's not just the ship she's controlling. She's controlling the entire battle. It's as if she's been trained in tactics, strategies. Impossible, the Admiral interrupted, shaking his head. This is a level of skill we've never seen before. The child's ship continued its attack, and the enemy ship faltered. With one final blast, the holographic enemy was destroyed. The simulation came to a halt, and the display flickered out. For a long moment, the room was silent. No one spoke. No one moved. The crew was in shock. Finally, the Admiral broke the silence. His voice was quiet, almost fearful. This is not just a child. This human has powers we can't understand. The captain nodded slowly, his mind racing. We've only just begun to uncover the truth. The child turned toward them again, her expression unchanged. You're not ready for what comes next, but you will be. In time, you'll all understand. And when you do, you'll know what I've known all along. With that, she turned away from the console, her task seemingly complete. But the crew was left with more questions than answers, and they all felt a sense of unease creeping over them. What had just happened? What kind of child could control a Starship simulator like that? And what did it mean for the galaxy? The Admiral looked at the captain. We have to find out who she really is, before it's too late. The room was still quiet, the eerie hum of the Starship simulator, the only sound that filled the air. The crew members exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of what they had just witnessed. No one dared to speak, and even the Admiral, normally a figure of authority, was at a loss for words. The child, however, seemed unfazed. She calmly stood by the console, her gaze focused on the now blank screen. After a few moments, the Admiral cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the situation. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice low but firm. The question hung in the air like a weight, heavy with the tension that had settled in the room. The child turned her head slightly, meeting his gaze. "I'm someone you don't fully understand yet," she replied, her voice calm, almost distant. The Admiral frowned, frustration creeping into his voice. "I've seen many things in my time, but nothing like you, a child, controlling a Starship simulator like that. How? Why? And what does it mean for the galaxy?" The captain, who had been quietly observing, stepped forward. "We need answers. This isn't just about a simple test or game. You showed us things no one should know at your age." The child's lips curled into a faint smile. "What you saw was only a small glimpse. The simulator was just a tool, not the real lesson. The real question is why it's so hard for you to believe that a human could do such things." The Admiral felt his patience wearing thin. "You're just a child. You can't be that skilled. No human could control a warship like that. Not without years of training and experience. Where did you learn this?" The child's smile faded, and she looked down at her hands. "I didn't learn it the way you think. It wasn't from books or machines. It's in me, in every human. It's part of who we are." The crew members exchanged confused glances. "What are you talking about?" the captain asked, his voice now tinged with a mix of disbelief and curiosity. "There's a power within humans, The child continued, her voice growing more serious. "A strength that has been lying dormant for centuries. Your kind doesn't understand it because you've never seen it. But it's there, in all of us. And I've tapped into it." The Admiral couldn't contain his disbelief. "This is absurd. You're claiming that every human has this ability to command ships and fight battles. That's impossible." The child's expression didn't change. "It's not impossible. It's the truth. And one day, you will understand it." The room fell silent again as the crew absorbed her words. But in that silence, something was starting to click. The Admiral's mind raced. Could it be true? Could humanity really possess such hidden potential? And if so, what did it mean for the future of the galaxy? "You're telling us that this power has always been here," the captain said slowly, as if trying to piece the puzzle together. "And now you're the one to show us." The child nodded. "I'm not the only one. There are others, but I was the first to find out. I'm the first to fully understand the truth." The Admiral stood in stunned silence. This was not just about a child who had somehow figured out how to use a simulator. This was about something far bigger, something that had the potential to change everything. "I'm not just here to show you a skill," the child continued, her voice unwavering. "I'm here to warn you. The galaxy isn't ready for what's coming. You won't be ready, but I'll help you. You'll need all the help you can get." "What's coming?" the Admiral asked, his voice low with concern. "What do you know that we don't?" The child took a deep breath, as if gathering her thoughts. "The galaxy is on the brink of war. The Coalition has enemies, powerful enemies, and they've been watching. Watching you. Watching me." The crew members shifted uneasily, exchanging glances. "Who are these enemies?" the captain asked, his voice tense. "I can't say yet," the child replied. "But soon, you'll know. The Coalition will learn the truth. And when it happens, you'll need to be prepared. You'll need to be stronger than ever before." The room grew colder as the weight of her words sank in. The Admiral, still in shock, knew that whatever she was saying, it wasn't just a warning. It was a call to action. The child turned away from the console and walked toward the door. "You've seen what I can do," she said, her voice calm. "But that's just the beginning. What's coming will test you all. And you'll need more than just Starship simulators to survive." Before anyone could respond, the door slid open, and the child stepped into the hallway, leaving the crew behind in stunned silence. The Admiral stared at the empty doorway, his mind racing with questions. What had just happened? What did she mean by all of this? And most importantly, was the galaxy truly ready for the storm that was coming? The hum of the Starship's engines was barely audible as the crew members sat in stunned silence. The child's words echoed in their minds like an ominous warning. The Admiral couldn't shake the image of her standing there, so calm, so confident, talking about powers no one had ever imagined possible. "We're not ready for this," the captain muttered, his voice tight with anxiety. "We're barely holding our own as it is. How are we supposed to face enemies that we don't even know exist?" The Admiral's face was hard, but his thoughts were troubled. He had led many battles, commanded entire fleets, but nothing in his vast experience had prepared him for a child, no older than 12, speaking of a power so hidden, so dangerous. And yet there was no denying the truth of her words. Something was coming, something far beyond their understanding. "What did she mean by the galaxy isn't ready?" the lieutenant asked, breaking the silence. "Is she talking about a war?" "I don't know," the Admiral replied, his voice low. "But we need to find out. Fast." He turned toward the holographic display in the center of the room, where the galaxy map flickered in front of him. It was a vast network of stars, planets, and systems, all under the watchful eye of the Galactic Coalition. But the Admiral knew the galaxy was far more complex than this map showed. There were hidden threats, rogue factions, and ancient powers, all lurking just out of sight. "We'll need to investigate," the Admiral said firmly, his tone suddenly sharp. Get in touch with our allies. The coalition needs to be prepared, even if they don't understand what's coming." The crew exchanged uncertain glances. There was little time to waste, and the Admiral knew it. The warning had been clear. Humanity had something powerful hidden within it, and the galaxy's enemies would be watching, waiting for their moment to strike. Meanwhile, in the darkest corner of the starship, the child was seated at a small table, her legs dangling as she stared out the small viewport. The stars beyond looked peaceful, distant, but the child knew better. The Admiral had been right to be skeptical. He had every reason to doubt her abilities. After all, she was just a child, wasn't she? But what they didn't know was that her abilities went far beyond anything they could imagine. The Starship simulator had been just the beginning, the first test, but there was so much more hidden beneath the surface. She could sense the approaching storm, the tension in the air, the creeping unease that spread through the crew. The child had always been able to sense things others couldn't. The power inside her had awakened in the most unexpected way. And now she knew it wasn't just about playing games or showing off. It was about survival. The enemies she spoke of were already here, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to strike. And when they did, there would be no second chances. The coalition had no idea what they were up against. The power of humanity was ancient, untapped, and dangerous. The child stood up suddenly, her eyes narrowing as she looked at the stars outside. She had to prepare. Time was running out. Back in the main command center, the Admiral had gathered his senior officers around a table. A plan was beginning to form, though it was still unclear how they would confront the danger the child had warned them about. "I'll reach out to the High Council," the captain said, standing next to the Admiral. "They need to know about this. If we don't act now, we'll be blindsided." The Admiral nodded, but there was a sense of urgency in his eyes. He wasn't sure the Council would believe them. They had always dismissed humanity as weak, primitive even. The child's revelation could be dismissed as nothing more than the ramblings of a confused young girl. But deep down, the Admiral knew better. "We'll need to act fast," he said. "I want a full investigation into every threat we've encountered, every enemy we faced. We need to figure out who's really out there and what their next move is." The captain frowned, his expression dark. "And what about the child? She seems to know more than she's letting on." The Admiral's jaw tightened. "We'll keep her close. She may be our best hope. If humanity really does possess this hidden power, we need to understand it. We need to know what we're dealing with before it's too late." The crew members exchanged uneasy glances. There was still so much they didn't understand, so much they couldn't yet see. Outside the command center, the stars seemed to mock their uncertainty. In the cold vacuum of space, danger was always lurking, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And the child knew it better than anyone. With each passing second, the sense of foreboding grew. The child could feel the pull of something far bigger than herself. She had seen the future, glimpsed the horrors that awaited. The coalition might not be ready, but she was. She had no choice but to prepare them. Her journey was just beginning. And with it, a conflict that would shake the galaxy to its core. The days that followed were tense aboard the Starship. Everyone knew something was coming, but no one knew exactly what. The child's warning had shaken the crew, and despite their best efforts, they couldn't shake the feeling that the galaxy was about to change in ways they couldn't even predict. The Admiral, a seasoned leader who had seen countless battles, could sense it. Something dangerous was lurking just beyond their reach, something ancient and unseen. The crew worked tirelessly, analyzing every bit of data they could find, but all their searches turned up nothing. There were no signs of the enemies the child had spoken of, no trace of any hidden threats or approaching forces. It was as if the galaxy was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. But the child knew better. She had always been able to sense things others couldn't. Even now, as she sat in her small quarters, her mind was racing. She had seen flashes of what was to come, glimpses of a battle unlike anything the galaxy had ever known. She could feel the presence of the enemy, lurking in the shadows, biding its time. Her fingers twitched as she thought about the power that ran through her veins, the power she had only begun to understand. It wasn't just a game, like she had initially thought. No, it was much more than that. She was part of something much bigger, something ancient. Humanity had a hidden strength, one that had been forgotten by most, but was waiting to be unleashed. And now, it seemed that this power was the only thing that could stop the storm that was coming. As she stood by the viewport, staring out at the stars, her thoughts drifted to the Admiral and his crew. They were good people, but they didn't understand. They didn't know what she knew. They hadn't seen what she had seen. But she had to get them to believe her. She had to make them understand that the enemy wasn't just a threat. It was a force of destruction, a force that would consume everything in its path if they weren't careful. The galaxy, the coalition, they were all in danger, and she was the only one who could stop it. Meanwhile, in the command center, the Admiral and his officers continued to pore over their findings. Despite their best efforts, there was still no sign of any impending threat. The child's warning, while unsettling, seemed more like a riddle than a real danger. They couldn't find any evidence of enemies hiding in the galaxy, and the Coalition's intelligence network had come up empty. "What are we missing?" the captain asked, his voice filled with frustration. "We've scored every system. There's no sign of anything unusual." The Admiral stared at the holographic display in front of him, his brow furrowed. He knew that something wasn't right. But what? The child's words echoed in his mind, and he couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the verge of something bigger, something they just didn't understand yet. "We can't afford to ignore this," the Admiral said, his voice steady but tinged with urgency. "We need to trust her. She's seen something. We need to find out what it is." The lieutenant, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "You think the child is telling the truth about the power she spoke of?" The Admiral nodded slowly. "Yes, there's more to her than meets the eye. We've all seen her skills in the simulator, but I think there's something else, something hidden deep inside her. We need to unlock that, figure out how it fits into all of this." The captain looked skeptical. "And what if we're wrong? What if there's nothing out there, and we're just chasing shadows?" "We won't know until we look," the Admiral replied, his voice hardening. "If we wait until it's too late, we'll be the ones caught off guard." The crew exchanged uneasy glances. They had no idea what the Admiral was thinking, but they all knew one thing. They couldn't afford to be unprepared. Back in her quarters, the child was deep in thought. She had to act fast. The enemy she had seen in her visions was getting closer and time was running out. She needed to find a way to communicate what she knew, to show the crew that the threat was real. But how? How could she make them understand without revealing everything? A soft knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. She turned quickly, surprised to see the Admiral standing there, his expression serious. "I need to talk to you," he said, stepping into her room without waiting for an invitation. The child nodded and gestured for him to sit. The tension in the room was thick, as if the air itself was waiting for something. "I've been thinking about what you said," the Admiral began, his voice low. "And I want to know more. What do you really see? What's coming? And how can we stop it?" The child hesitated for a moment, unsure of how much to reveal. But the Admiral's intense gaze made her realize that there was no turning back. If she was going to help them, she needed to trust him. "The enemy is hidden," she said slowly. "They're not just waiting in the dark. They're already here, in plain sight. They've been watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. They're ancient, powerful, and they know how to manipulate the galaxy. The Coalition doesn't know what's coming. They think they're safe, but they're not." The Admiral leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Who are they?" The child shook her head. "I don't know their names. But I know their purpose, and I know they won't stop until they've destroyed everything. We can't wait until they make their move. We need to act now." The Admiral sat back, his face a mixture of disbelief and concern. For the first time, he was starting to understand the gravity of the situation. But the question remained, could they really stop an enemy so hidden, so powerful, or were they already too late? The mystery deepened as the child and the Admiral realized that the hidden enemy wasn't just a distant threat. It was already inside their walls, watching, waiting. The realization sent a ripple of fear through the crew, and the pressure to act grew stronger with each passing moment. But the clock was ticking, and the storm was coming. The Admiral stood alone in his command center, the cold blue light of the star charts flickering across his face. He had always been a man of reason, relying on logic, strategy, and experience to guide his decisions. But what the child had told him, what she had shown him, was beyond his understanding. The threat was too large, too insidious. It was not just a war they were preparing for. It was an unraveling of everything they thought they knew. He ran a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of responsibility press down on him. It wasn't just the fate of his ship or his crew that was at stake. It was the fate of the entire galaxy. And for the first time in his long career, he was unsure of how to proceed. The child had been adamant. The enemy wasn't waiting to strike. They were already inside, infiltrating their ranks. They had power beyond anything the Coalition had ever seen, and the child, this young human girl, was the only one who seemed to understand it. He had never put stock in superstitions or mysticism, but the strange power she wielded in the simulator, the way she had played the game as if it were real. It made him wonder if there was something to her words. Her abilities were beyond anything he had ever seen. In the span of a few days, she had gone from an unassuming child to the most valuable member of the crew. Her intuition had guided them. Her insights into strategy had outwitted the best minds on board. And now, the Admiral found himself turning to her more than anyone else. The Admiral's thoughts were interrupted by a sharp beep from his console. It was a communication request from the child. Without hesitation, he accepted the call. Her face appeared on the screen, calm but serious, a stark contrast to the panic that had been rising in the command center. She knew something the others didn't, and it was time for her to reveal more. "We don't have much time," the child said, her voice steady. "The enemy has found a way to manipulate the very fabric of space. They're hiding in plain sight, using the cosmic network to travel unnoticed. They'd been moving through the galaxy for centuries, building their power, watching everything. They control information, and they control how we see the universe." The Admiral was stunned. "Are you telling me they've been here all along?" The child nodded. "Yes, and now they are ready to act. But they won't come at us directly. They'll use our own systems against us. They'll cause chaos, confusion, and trust me, you won't see it coming until it's too late." The Admiral's mind raced. If this was true, they were facing something unlike anything the galaxy had ever dealt with. It wasn't just an army or a fleet of ships. The enemy was a force, an unseen influence capable of manipulating everything from trade routes to military strategies. They were a ghost, existing in the background, shifting the galaxy's fate with subtlety and precision. He had to act. But how? How do you fight an enemy who is everywhere and nowhere at the same time? "Is there any way to stop them?" the Admiral asked, his voice low. The child hesitated for a moment. Then she spoke with the confidence of someone who had seen the answer in her mind for a long time. "Yes, but it requires more than just force. You need to understand their weaknesses. You need to disrupt their influence, expose them for what they are. You need to use the power they've overlooked, the power of humanity." The Admiral's eyebrows knitted together. "What do you mean by that?" "Humans have something the other species don't," the child said. "We've always had the ability to adapt, to think outside the box, to improvise. While the other civilizations are content to play by the rules, we've always been the ones willing to break them." It clicked. He remembered how humans had been able to turn the tide of the war before, using unconventional tactics and unrelenting willpower to surprise their enemies. The child was right. They had a gift that no one else seemed to understand. "All right," the Admiral said, his voice firm now. "Let's do it. Tell me what we need to do." The child's eyes seemed to gleam with an unspoken determination. "First, we need to disrupt their communication channels. We need to hack into their networks, sever their control over the systems they've infiltrated." The Admiral nodded. "We've already started. We're in the process of scanning for any anomalies in our communications grid. But that's not going to be enough, is it?" "No," the child replied. "It's just the beginning. After that, we have to target their vessels, the ones hiding in plain sight. They won't expect a direct attack. We can use their arrogance against them. Their trust in their invisibility will be their downfall." "And how do we find them?" The Admiral's tone was skeptical but determined. "We don't," she said. "They'll find us. And when they do, we'll be ready." Meanwhile, the rest of the crew continued to prepare, still unsure of the true extent of the threat. The child's words had left them with more questions than answers, but the Admiral's confidence was enough to keep them moving forward. The unknown was terrifying, yes, but it was also the only thing standing between them and the enemy. And if there was one thing humanity had proven time and time again, it was that they could overcome even the darkest of challenges. As the Admiral stared out at the stars once more, he realized that the universe was full of mysteries, but it was also full of possibilities. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: humanity would rise to meet whatever came their way. The Admiral stood at the command center, staring out into the vast expanse of space. The stars were distant, cold points of light scattered across the void. But tonight, they would hold meaning. The future of the galaxy depended on what would unfold in the next few hours. Everything had led up to this moment. The child's plan was simple, but dangerous. She had managed to break through the enemy's invisible veil, revealing their true intentions. The enemy wasn't just hiding. They were organizing, manipulating, and preparing to strike. But humanity, with all its flaws, its unpredictability, and its ingenuity, had one thing that no one else could match: the ability to outthink its enemies. The Admiral glanced at the child standing next to him, her young face filled with the calm determination of someone who had already seen the outcome of the battle in her mind. She had been right about everything so far. The question was, could they trust her insights one last time? "Are we ready?" the Admiral asked, his voice steady despite the storm brewing outside their ship. The child nodded. "We've set the trap. We've disabled their communications, we've found their hidden ships, and now all we need is for them to take the bait." The Admiral's fingers drummed against the console in front of him. The fleet was assembled, but the enemy wasn't going to be easily defeated. The battle was going to be unlike anything they had ever faced. They would be fighting against an enemy that had been hiding in plain sight for centuries. "Once they engage," the Admiral said, turning to face the crew, "we will hit them hard and fast. No second chances. We have to strike with everything we've got." The crew nodded in agreement. Their faces, once filled with doubt and fear, were now resolute. They had learned to trust the child, to listen to her warnings, and to believe in the possibility that humanity could win against an unseen, all-powerful foe. The child's plan wasn't just about brute force. It was about timing. The enemy had grown arrogant, relying too much on their stealth and manipulation. Now they would be forced to confront their own weaknesses. They thought they controlled everything, but they had underestimated humanity's will to survive, to fight, and to adapt. The moment came quickly, a ripple in the fabric of space, a sign the enemy was closing in. The Admiral's heart raced. He turned to his tactical officer. Now, a massive pulse of energy shot out from the ship, sending a shockwave through the nearby space. The enemy ships, hidden in the shadows, suddenly revealed themselves. Their sleek, almost invisible vessels flickered into existence, momentarily disoriented by the disruption. The crew sprang into action. Weapons were armed, shields raised, and every tactical advantage the humans had worked for was now in play. The battle had begun. For a moment, everything seemed to slow down. The child's voice rang through the Admiral's mind, clear and steady. They think they've won before they've even fought. That's their mistake. The first strike hit hard, human firepower clashing against the once-hidden enemy fleet. The enemy was powerful, but the humans were relentless. They had something the invaders couldn't understand: the will to fight against the impossible. The ship rocked as enemy fire slammed against their shields. The Admiral's eyes narrowed. The tactics they had learned from the child were playing out exactly as she had predicted. The enemy was on the defensive, reacting to their moves instead of controlling the fight. As the battle raged, the Admiral realized that the power of humanity was more than just strategy. It was the unwavering belief that they would never give up, no matter the odds. Every human ship, every soldier, every officer fought not just for survival, but for the future, for their place in the galaxy. The child, standing beside him, turned toward him with a look of quiet satisfaction. They'd never seen anything like this before. We're not just defending ourselves. We're fighting for our future. And just like that, it clicked. The Admiral understood what the child had been trying to tell him all along. The real strength of humanity wasn't in their weapons or their ships. It was in their resolve, their creativity, and their relentless pursuit of victory. They didn't just adapt to challenges. They created solutions that no one had ever imagined. The final push came. The enemy, caught off guard by the sheer force and unpredictability of the human assault, began to retreat. Their once pristine ships now scattered, damaged, and lost. Humanity had struck a blow that would be felt for generations. As the last enemy ship turned to flee, the Admiral's voice echoed through the ship's comms. Victory is ours. But there was no celebration, not yet. The Admiral knew that this victory was just the beginning. They had faced an enemy that no one else could have even seen, and yet humanity had prevailed. The galaxy would remember this day, not as the day they fought against a great threat, but as the day they witnessed the true power of humanity. As the Admiral turned back to the child, he saw the quiet wisdom in her eyes. She had known all along what it would take to win. And in that moment, he understood that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't in their technology, their strategy, or their firepower. It was in their hearts. And as the stars above them shone brightly, the Admiral finally realized what he had known all along. No matter what came next, humanity would never back down.